The silent note. The air inside the Dalton estate was thick with perfume, money, and quiet cruelty. Chandeliers sparkled above the heads of the town's most polished faces, casting a golden glow that made everything look elegant, even when the words spoken were anything but. Laughter echoed like clinking glass, sharp and hollow. Maria stood at the edge of the grand living room, half in shadow, as if the light had decided she didn't belong. Her hands were folded gently in front of her, not from fear but from habit, the kind of habit that forms after a lifetime of trying not to be noticed. Maria was the house helper, the woman who cooked, cleaned, answered softly, and disappeared even more softly. She moved like a breeze, present but unseen. People called her the quiet one, as if quietness was a flaw. She never corrected them. Silence had always been her safest armor. In a world that measured worth by noise and shine, Maria had neither. But what she did have, she carried inside, so deeply buried that even she had almost forgotten it existed. Tonight was Mrs. Dalton's birthday, an event that was less about celebration and more about display. The guests arrived in luxury, cars wrapped in silk and designer labels. Their voices filled the mansion with talk of stocks, summer houses, and exclusive memberships. Maria served drinks, picked up discarded napkins, and smiled politely at people who didn't see her. Mrs. Dalton, with her perfectly sculpted hair and smile that never reached her eyes, was the queen of this evening. She held a wine glass like a trophy and floated from guest to guest with effortless superiority. She enjoyed being admired, feared, envied, but most of all, she enjoyed control. And tonight, she spotted an opportunity in Maria. Maria, she called, her voice slicing through the chatter like a bell in a chapel. Every head turned. Maria paused, 1 foot still behind the curtain that separated the kitchen from the living room. "Come here, dear," Mrs. Dalton said sweetly, too sweetly. It was the tone people used before humiliating someone in public. Maria stepped forward, slowly, her plain dress brushing against her ankles, her shoes silent on the polished floor. "We were just talking about talents," Mrs. Dalton announced to the room, and I thought to myself, surely Maria must have a hidden talent. "Don't you, darling?" The question wasn't a question. It was a trap. Maria looked at her for a moment, then at the sea of amused faces around her. They were watching her, the way people watch animals at the zoo, curious, distant, safe in the knowledge that the glass wall was still in place. "I don't know," Maria said quietly, her voice barely reaching the back of the room. "Nonsense," said a man near, the fireplace swirling a drink. "Everyone has something. Can you sing? Do a little dance? Maybe she's good at ironing," a woman in pearls laughed, "or folding napkins into swans." Laughter erupted. It wasn't joyful. It was sharp, biting, the kind that makes people feel powerful at someone else's expense. Mrs. Dalton, with a performer's flair, gestured toward the grand piano by the window. It stood like a silent observer, untouched all evening. "How about the piano?" she said, her voice rising. "Can you play, Maria?" Maria hesitated. The sight of the piano pulled something from deep within her chest. A memory, a feeling, a ghost of a sound long forgotten. But she didn't let it show. She simply shook her head gently. "Come now," Mrs. Dalton pressed, her voice full of forced charm. "Don't be shy. This is a friendly room." Maria looked around. Nothing about the room felt friendly. It felt like a courtroom, and she was on trial for being ordinary. "I haven't played in a long time," she admitted, her hands trembling just slightly. "Then it's the perfect time to start again," Mrs. Dalton said, already walking toward the piano as if Maria had agreed. "Come. Humor us. Just one little tune." Maria stood still. Her body screamed no, but something else, something quieter, deeper, whispered yes. Not to prove anything, not to please them, but for herself. A voice inside her, long ignored, stirred awake. She walked slowly toward the piano. The room fell quiet. Even the laughter died, replaced by the prickling silence that always comes before people expect to be entertained or embarrassed. Maria sat on the bench. The keys stared back at her, clean and untouched. She lifted her hands, but didn't place them on the piano yet. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the room disappeared. She was not in the Dalton estate anymore. She was a young girl again, sitting beside her father in a sunlit room, his fingers dancing across ivory keys as he taught her to listen to the silence between the notes. Music is not just sound, he had said. It's emotion turned into something the world can hear. Back then, Maria believed in music the way others believed in miracles. But after he passed, the silence swallowed everything. Life became survival. And the piano? It became a luxury she could no longer afford to remember. But now, in this room of cruelty, surrounded by people waiting for her to fall, she felt something rise in her. Not anger, not pride. Something gentler, something powerful. She placed her fingers on the keys, and then she played. The song no one expected. The first note floated out like a whisper, fragile, hesitant, almost uncertain of itself. But then it was followed by another, then another, like timid footsteps finding courage with each step forward. The laughter in the room froze in place like wind turned to glass. Something about the sound made people stop mid-sip, mid-sentence. The guests who had moments ago mocked her now stood suspended in time, unsure what was happening. Their eyes locked on the woman they thought they had already measured. Maria's hands moved slowly at first, unsure of their own freedom. Her fingers, pressed down with care like someone reopening an old wound, half afraid of what might come out. But what came was not pain, it was beauty. Not flashy, not loud, but pure and full of soul. The music she played wasn't a grand performance or a rehearsed piece. It was something raw, something real. It felt like a memory made of sound. The room began to change. Mrs. Dalton's smirk faltered. Her wine glass, held elegantly a moment ago, now drooped slightly in her hand. She had expected a mess, a painful, clunky attempt at music that would fuel another round of laughter. But what she got was something else entirely, something she couldn't control. Maria's eyes remained closed. Her body didn't sway with showy confidence. She didn't move like a performer. She moved like a person remembering who she was. The keys answered her touch, soft and obedient, as if they too had waited all this time for her return. The song was not familiar to the guests. It was not something they had heard at a gala or on a classical radio station. It had no name. It was Maria's, built from grief, shaped by silence, colored by every moment she had swallowed tears and chosen dignity instead. And as she played, something shifted in the hearts of those who listened. For the first time in that house, silence meant reverence. Among the crowd, a young woman named Claire lowered her champagne glass and whispered, "She's beautiful." It wasn't about appearance, it was about presence. Maria, once a shadow, now stood at the center of the room without rising from the bench. A man near the window slowly sat down, his eyes wet and unblinking. He had no words. The music had reached a place he thought no one else could touch. Maria's hands moved with more certainty now. The melody deepened. It carried weight, not just notes, but emotion, longing, forgiveness, sorrow wrapped in hope. She remembered everything as she played. Her father's smile, the feel of his hands guiding hers, the way music had made the world softer, safer, for just a moment. When she finally lifted her hands, the last note hung in the air like a final breath before silence reclaimed the room. And then, nothing. No applause, no laughter, just stunned, aching stillness. Maria opened her eyes and looked up. They were all staring at her, not with mockery or pity, but with something unfamiliar. Awe, guilt, maybe even shame. Their faces had changed. The masks had slipped. Mrs. Dalton cleared her throat, trying to recover her position, but the usual confidence in her voice was missing. "That was unexpected," she said, her words falling flat in the heavy silence. Maria didn't respond. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked back to her corner. the same way she had come. But now, the room seemed to lean toward her, as if trying to understand something they'd never bothered to see before. One guest, an older man named Mr. Elliot, approached her slowly. His voice was soft, careful. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Maria looked at him, her eyes calm and kind. "My father taught me," she said. "A long time ago." "Why did you stop?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "Life doesn't always make space for music," he nodded. "But it should." Others in the room began to shift awkwardly, unsure how to interact with her now that the labels didn't fit. The quiet maid, the simple woman, the invisible helper. Those descriptions had cracked and fallen apart like old paint. They were left with a version of Maria they hadn't expected. And that unsettled them. Later that night, after most guests had left and the house was nearly quiet, Maria stood alone at the piano. The keys were cool under her fingertips again. She didn't play this time. She just touched them, like an old friend returned from far, away. Behind her a voice spoke, low, nervous. "You played beautifully tonight." Maria turned. It was Claire, the woman who had whispered during the performance. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with kind eyes and uncertain hands. "I didn't know you could do that," Claire said. "Neither did I," Maria replied, her voice soft. "You should play more," Claire said. "Not just for them. For you." Maria didn't answer right away. But something in her shifted. For the first time in many years, she felt not just seen, but heard. And that feeling, once lit, could not be easily put out. But as the clock struck midnight and Maria returned to the small room behind the kitchen, she didn't know that this one song would be only the beginning. Others had noticed, and not all of them would respond with kindness. Far from the Dalton estate, in a quiet office where an old piano competition organizer was browsing social media, a video clip was playing. Someone had secretly recorded Maria's performance and uploaded it with the caption, "Maid stuns rich guests with piano masterpiece." And it was going viral, the sound that traveled too far. When Maria woke the next morning, she had no idea the world outside her small window had changed. Her room, tucked at the back of the Dalton estate near the servant quarters, was quiet as always. The sun filtered through the curtain in gentle slants, painting lines across the modest furniture she had lived with for years. The only sound was the faint chirping of birds outside and the soft hum of a world beginning another ordinary day. But this day would be anything but ordinary. Maria dressed as she always did, plain clothes, neat hair, soft shoes. She brushed her fingers over the side of her bed, took a slow breath, and prepared for the day ahead. In her heart, she still carried the echo of last night's music, unsure whether it had been a dream or a moment of real freedom. She didn't expect it to matter to anyone but herself. But when she stepped into the kitchen, she found Claire already there, eyes wide, phone in hand, her face flushed with disbelief. "Maria," she said breathlessly, "you need to see this." Maria hesitated. She rarely used phones. She didn't have social media. She didn't live her life online. But Claire held the phone out like it was something holy. "Someone recorded you playing last night," she said. "It's everywhere." Maria stared at the screen. There she was, seated at the Daltons' grand piano, eyes closed, fingers moving over the keys like she was conjuring a dream. The video had been trimmed, edited, and posted with captions in bold white letters. "Maid stuns elite party with emotional piano performance." Below it, comments were flooding in. "Who is she?" This brought me to tears. So real, so human. "She plays like someone who's lived through pain. Give her a record deal." Maria's breath caught in her throat. Her face flushed. Her hands trembled, not with joy but with unease. She had not asked for this. That moment at the piano had been private, even if it happened in a room full of people. It had been her reclaiming a part of herself, not performing for the world, and now that moment was no longer hers. "I didn't know someone was recording," she whispered. "It doesn't matter," Claire said. People are seeing the real you now. But Maria wasn't sure she wanted to be seen that way. Not by strangers, not in pixels and hashtags. She had spent her life learning how to disappear, how to move through the world without disturbing its surface. Now the surface had cracked. Within hours, the phone at the Dalton estate began ringing more than usual. Some calls were hang-ups, others were journalists. One came from a woman claiming to be a talent agent, another from a music school. Mrs. Dalton, who had orchestrated the original humiliation, was now faced with the strange irony that her mockery had sparked something much bigger than she had intended. She wasn't pleased. "This is getting out of hand," she said sharply as Maria cleared breakfast dishes. "Don't let it get to your head. It was just one song." Maria nodded silently, but something inside her disagreed. It hadn't been just one song. It had been a memory come to life, a secret uncovered, a truth finally spoken aloud. That evening, as Maria walked to the local market, a teenager on a bicycle skidded to a stop in front of her and shouted, "Are you the piano lady from the video?" She didn't answer, but her silence didn't protect her. The next day, a young journalist showed up outside the estate gate. He waited in the sun with a notepad and a kind smile. He didn't push his way inside. He just waited, as if he knew she'd come. When Maria passed through the gate with a grocery basket in hand, he stepped forward. "My name is Ben," he said. "I saw your video. I know you probably didn't want the attention, but I had to try. People are moved, not just by your playing, but by your story. What little they know of it. I was hoping you'd share more." Maria blinked. "There's nothing to share," she said softly. "That's what they all say," he replied. "Until they do." She didn't stop walking, but his words followed her like a shadow. That night, Claire found Maria sitting by the window, staring at the piano through the glass. It was locked now. Mrs. Dalton had decided it was best not to stir unnecessary drama. "They're talking about you on the radio," Claire said. "Even the local paper wants to do a story." Maria shook her head. "I'm not a story," she said. "But you are," Claire replied. "And not because of a video. Because you remind people of something they forgot, that beauty doesn't only come from stage lights and spotlights. Sometimes it's hidden, in the corners, in the quiet people, the ones who carry music in their bones and don't even know it." Maria didn't know what to say to that. For years, she had lived a life of quiet service. She had been content to be invisible, because visibility often meant danger or disappointment. Now the world was calling her forward, and she wasn't sure she knew how to answer. Then, late that night, she received a letter. Not a message, not a notification. A real letter, delivered in an envelope with careful handwriting. Claire had found it in the mailbox and brought it to her room. Maria opened it slowly, unfolding the paper with trembling hands. "Dear Maria, my name is William Shaw. I am the director of the National Youth Music Conservatory. I saw the video of you playing, and I was deeply moved. Your touch is rare. Your understanding of the instrument is something we only see once in a generation. I would be honored to invite you to visit our school. We believe there's much more to your music than even you realize. And if you are willing, I would like to offer you a full scholarship. No age limit. No previous diploma required. Just you, your hands and your soul. Sincerely, W." Shaw. Maria sat there for a long time, letter in hand, the words echoing louder than any applause ever could. But even as her heart stirred with something close to hope, she felt fear creeping in from the corners, because every offer comes with a price. Every door once opened casts a shadow, and somewhere in the shadows of the Dalton estate, someone had started watching her with eyes that didn't see inspiration, but threat. Echoes beyond the keys. Maria had never been inside a music school, not even once. The closest she had ever come was walking past the windows of a small piano academy when she was young, pressing her ear to the glass to catch the sound of scales and arpeggios. It had always seemed like another world, distant, reserved for others. People with money, people with connections, people who didn't live lives like hers. Now, as she stepped through the tall glass doors of the National Youth Music Conservatory, Her hands gripped the strap of her old cloth purse tightly, as though it might anchor her to the earth before she floated away. Everything inside was polished and modern. Shining floors, framed portraits of famous musicians, the faint scent of wood polish and ink. The hallways echoed softly with the sound of distant piano notes being practiced behind closed doors. The letter had been real. Mr. William Shaw had followed up with a call. Kind, gentle, respectful. He didn't treat her like a viral moment or a charity case. He spoke to her like a musician, someone whose music had value. It frightened her a little, how good it felt to be taken seriously. But the warmth of the invitation couldn't fully melt the unease growing beneath her ribs. As she was led down the corridor by an assistant, Maria kept her head low, her feet light, trying not to disturb the space around her. The other students she passed looked young, confident, well-dressed. They held music sheets, joked in hushed tones, and carried the easy certainty of people who had been trained, encouraged, and praised their whole lives. She didn't belong here. But then she was brought into a quiet room, a small practice studio, with a grand piano at its center and Mr. Shaw standing beside it. He was in his 60s, tall and lean with silver hair, a thick scarf draped across his shoulders, and eyes that seemed to look into the parts of a person they tried to hide. "Maria," he said warmly, offering his hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook it gently. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his smile never fading. "Would you mind playing something? Anything. It doesn't need to be perfect." She nodded. Then she sat, and like before, she didn't choose a famous piece. She didn't rely on technique or showmanship. She closed her eyes and let her hands find the story inside her. This time it was gentler, softer, like a question posed to the world. And somehow the room seemed to lean in to listen. When she finished, Mr. Shaw looked at her not with amazement, but with something rarer. Recognition. "You play like someone who never had a teacher," he said. "And that's not a bad thing. It means your voice hasn't been shaped into anyone else's. It's still yours." Maria looked away. "I had a teacher once, my father, before he died." "He gave you something precious," Shaw said quietly. "You've carried it well." He offered her not just a scholarship, but a place to practice, to learn, to rest. He told her there was no rush, no obligation, only music if she wanted it. Maria left the conservatory that evening with trembling hands and a heart she didn't recognize, filled with something close to possibility. But not everyone was pleased. Back at the Dalton estate, the mood had shifted. Mrs. Dalton, once amused by Maria's presence, now watched her with attention that could not be explained by discomfort alone. The household staff noticed it first. How Mrs. Dalton no longer called for Maria as often. How her voice turned clipped and cold when they spoke. How she avoided eye contact. It wasn't just jealousy. It was fear. Because someone had sent Mrs. Dalton a letter too. Anonymous. No return address. But inside, a single line typed in bold black ink. Ask her who her father really was. Mrs. Dalton read it twice. Then again. Then folded it slowly. Eyes narrowing. There were stories, old ones, about Maria's mother. A woman who once worked in a nearby estate as a maid, who left abruptly when she was pregnant. No one knew much about the father. Or if they did, they hadn't spoken. But Mrs. Dalton had always suspected there was more to Maria than she let on. And now, the world's attention was turning toward the simple woman in her home, the quiet girl she had dismissed. Mrs. Dalton didn't like losing control. One evening, a few days later, Maria returned from the conservatory to find a box left outside her room. There was no note, no name. She brought it inside carefully, opened it slowly and froze. Inside were old photographs. Faded, creased, some nearly torn. Pictures of a man, tall, handsome, smiling at a piano. Pictures of him holding a little girl, her, and beside him, a woman, Maria's mother. And in one photograph, blurred but unmistakable, the man stood beside another figure. Mrs. Dalton's late husband. Maria stared at the photo, the room tilting slightly beneath her. Confusion and dread crept into her spine. The photos told a story she didn't fully understand, but the implications were heavy. She turned one of them over, a date scribbled on the back. She was born only 2 months later. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. Not because of the piano, not because of the school, but because the ground beneath her identity had started to crack. Who was her father, really? Had her mother kept it from her on purpose? What would the truth cost her now? And as she sat in silence, a text arrived on Claire's phone from an unknown number. She showed it to Maria the next morning. If she keeps playing, the truth will come out, and it won't be pretty. The storm beneath the silence. Days passed, but the air around Maria felt heavier with each sunrise. She moved through her routine with quiet grace, but her thoughts were no longer still. Music, once her refuge, now carried questions with every note. The anonymous text sent to Claire, the box of old photographs, the name she had read in a forgotten ink, all of it circled inside her like a storm without rain. Maria sat at the piano inside the conservatory's practice room, her fingers resting above the keys, but she did not play. She stared at the instrument, once a bridge to something pure, and now a doorway to something terrifying. Behind her, the door creaked open. It was Mr. Shaw. He stood for a moment, then gently walked in and sat nearby. His presence never demanded attention, but today, even his calm seemed tinged with quiet urgency. "You haven't played all week," he said softly. Maria looked at him. Her eyes were tired, not from work, but from holding back what she couldn't explain. "I can't," she whispered. He nodded. "You're not the first musician to feel that way. Sometimes silence is part of the music." Maria took a slow breath, then turned toward him. "What if the truth ruins it all? What if it doesn't matter how well I play, or what I feel, if the world only wants the story behind it? A story I don't even understand?" Mr. Shaw leaned forward slightly. "Maria, I've been around music for over 40 years. I've seen prodigies rise and fall, seen talent buried under fame, seen hearts break from praise that wasn't real. What matters isn't the noise outside. It's what the music means to you. But," he added gently, "if something is weighing on you, something real, you don't have to carry it alone." Maria lowered her gaze. She wanted to tell him. She wanted someone else to hold the burden, even for a moment. But how do you speak of a truth you're still trying to believe yourself? That evening, Claire found her sitting outside the servant quarters, staring up at the stars. The night was cool, quiet, and thick with unspoken thoughts. "They sent another message," Claire said quietly, holding her phone. Maria looked at her, fear flickering behind her calm expression. "What did it say?" Claire hesitated, then read it aloud. "Stop the piano recital, or we release the full story." Maria closed her eyes. The conservatory had invited her to perform next month at a public showcase, an event that would introduce her talent to a much wider audience, including music journalists, agents, and sponsors. It was a gift. But now it felt like a threat. "What story are they talking about?" Claire asked carefully. "Maria, what's happening?" For a long time, Maria said nothing. Then quietly she began. "My mother worked in a house like this years ago, before I was born. She was young, strong, kind, and she fell in love with a man who didn't belong to her world." Claire listened, her breath held. "He was married," Maria continued, "rich, respected, powerful. But to my mother he was gentle. They played music together. He taught her things, told her things, promised her things. Then one day, he was gone. And she found out she was carrying me. The truth hung heavy in the air, like the final note of a sad song. "Do you know who he was?" Claire asked. Maria nodded slowly. "I think it was Mr. Dalton, Mrs. Dalton's husband." Claire's mouth parted slightly, shocked. That's why she hates me, Maria said. She always suspected. She treated me like a stranger even when I did everything she asked. But now that people are watching me, she's afraid. Afraid the truth will come out and her perfect story will break. They sat in silence for a long time. The stars above seemed to blink in quiet sympathy. So, what will you do? Claire finally asked. Maria looked out at the night. I don't know, I want to play. Not for fame, not for revenge, just because it's who I am. But if playing means hurting others or tearing open wounds they never wanted revealed, is it worth it? Claire leaned closer. What about your mother? What would she have wanted you to do? Maria blinked and tears welled in her eyes. She remembered her mother's hands, rough from cleaning, gentle when they touched her face. Her mother had once said, "You were born of a broken promise, but that doesn't make you broken." She stood. The next day, Maria walked through the conservatory's doors with calm steps. The weight of her decision pressed on her chest like stone, but her eyes were clear. She found Mr. Shaw in his office. "I want to perform," she said simply. He looked up, surprised but moved. "Are you sure?" "No," she said, smiling softly, "but I'm ready." Preparations began immediately. The recital hall was a grand space with velvet curtains and hundreds of seats. Word had spread beyond the campus. Tickets were sold out. Everyone wanted to see the simple woman who played like a ghost. Maria had become a name, even without a story attached. But the story was coming. Someone would make sure of that. Week before the recital, Claire found an envelope taped to her locker. Inside was a photograph and a typed message. "Release this to the press if she steps on stage." The photo was one of the same ones Maria had found in the box, her father, arm around her mother, the Dalton name barely visible in the corner of the frame. Claire showed it to Maria. "You don't have to do this," Claire said. "We can walk away. Forget the recital. Stay quiet." Maria stared at the photo, then she tore it in half. "I've lived my whole life walking away," she said. "This time I'm walking toward something." The final performance. The stage lights glowed softly as the audience filtered into the auditorium. The conservatory's main recital hall was filled beyond capacity, the seats occupied by music lovers, curious guests, critics, students, and strangers who had only seen a single video online, but had come to see for themselves. Whispers floated between rows like, "Small wins, is that her? The maid who plays like a memory? I heard she's connected to someone powerful." Backstage, Maria sat alone. She wasn't dressed in anything extravagant, just a modest black dress, long sleeves, hair tied back simply. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, no false mask. Just herself. Her fingers rested quietly on her lap. She had already practiced the piece, dozens of times. But this time was different. This was not about proving her talent. This was about choosing not to hide. Mr. Shaw peeked through the curtain and returned to her side. "It's a full house," he said softly. Maria looked up at him. "Are they here to listen?" He smiled. "Maybe not all of them, but the right ones will." She stood. Her legs felt steady beneath her for the first time in weeks. The announcer walked onto the stage and the crowd hushed instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight we invite you not to hear a performance but to witness a story told through the language of music by a woman who carries a song inside her that many tried to silence. Please welcome Maria Elena." A warm round of applause began. Polite, curious, expectant. Maria walked onto the stage, each step echoing in her ears like a drumbeat. The spotlight settled gently on her, not glaring, but soft, like the moonlight she once watched from the back steps of the Dalton estate. She sat before the grand piano and let the quiet fall over the room like a blanket. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes were delicate. Barely. A breath. They trembled like fragile glass. The sound so pure that some in the audience leaned forward instinctively, afraid to miss even a whisper. As her fingers moved, the melody deepened. It was not a song written by anyone famous. It wasn't classical, or jazz, or any label the world knew. It was her story, and it moved through the room like a soul set free. Every note carried weight. The abandonment of a mother raising a child alone. The heartbreak of silent years. The sting of being mocked for being invisible. The quiet joy of rediscovering music. The slow, steady choice to forgive, not just others, but herself. Somewhere in the third movement, Maria's eyes shimmered. Tears welled but did not fall. She played through them, her body still, her heart wide open. And in that moment, the audience changed. No longer critics, no longer strangers, they became witnesses. Mrs. Dalton sat in the back row. She had come alone behind dark glasses, hoping the girl would falter, that the pressure would undo her. But instead, she saw something else. She saw herself on the wrong side of a mirror. A woman who had built her life trying to protect a reputation, now watching someone she once called just a maid become the voice of every person the world had overlooked. And then, something unexpected happened halfway through Maria's performance. A man in his late 60s stood from his seat near the middle of the hall and walked slowly toward the edge of the stage. Security looked unsure but didn't move. The audience watched, hushed, as the man approached the side of the piano, tears streaking his face. Maria didn't stop playing. She didn't have to look at him. She already knew who he was. He knelt down beside the stage, his hand over his heart. Maria's father. Not the one in the photographs. Not the one people had whispered about. The real one, after the concert, when the applause finally died and the crowd stood in silent respect, Maria remained seated. She didn't bow. She simply looked into the audience and let her hands fall gently into her lap. And then she spoke. Softly. But the microphone carried her voice clearly. "I was never meant to be on a stage like this," she said. "I grew up in silence. I was told to stay quiet, to stay small, but music never asked me to shrink, it always listened. And tonight I thank you not for clapping, but for listening with it." She stood, took one final look at the piano, and walked off stage. The next day the headlines told her story, but not the one Mrs. Dalton